You're listening to the Whole Hog Sports Podcast. And now, here's your host, Matt Jones.
Arkansas has a chance to do something Saturday that hasn't been done in 28 years. The Razorbacks haven't started SEC play 3-0 since 1997-98. Just to give you a perspective, that was Pat Bradley, Kareem Reed, Derek Hood. It's been a while since they've done it. They beat Ole Miss the other night to improve to 2-0. We'll see if they can get to 3-0 on Saturday. A game against Auburn, 5 o'clock tip-off against the Tigers down at their arena. Anthony Kristensen is going to be there for us. In fact, he's on the road right now to Auburn. Anthony, you stayed in Oxford for an extra night just to keep from coming back all this way and going back down south again. I wonder, before we start talking about basketball, what was it like being in Oxford last night, watching that playoff game, and I'm sure probably not a great reaction to the finish?
Yeah, no, it was fun. You know, we all went out to a couple different places, and obviously people were excited about the game. And you know, when it looked like Ole Miss was going to pull it out for a bit, you know, obviously it was people were getting loud, people were getting excited. I high fived a random man despite not having any rooting interests, which was fun. But no, it was fun. You know, and obviously it ended very silently. So a lot of people filed out pretty quickly when the game ended, but no, it was a fun experience. You could definitely, you know, I went on a couple morning jogs. You could see all of the Trinidad and Tobago flags all around the town, which was kind of cool, and you know all of that. But yeah, fun experience for sure.
All right, well, we'll move on to basketball. We moved on to basketball a long time here, or a long time ago here in Fayetteville. Arkansas and Auburn. This is a 5 o'clock tip-off on ESPN. Tom Hart and Dane Bradshaw will have the call. When you look at let's focus on Arkansas first. I thought against Ole Miss the other night they did just enough. Wasn't the cleanest operation, but it wasn't a bad one either. It never felt like at any point in that game that Ole Miss was ever threatening really to win it. There was a moment where they got a steal and they missed a transition three that could have brought them within one. That maybe you think at that point, if this goes, then you're sweating it a little bit. But you know, I thought Arkansas felt very in control in that game. You know, a game that I thought could have been a little bit of a trap because, again, Ole Miss is in the playoff. The students aren't on campus. It's just kind of a weird dynamic there, and I know you felt that yourself, Anthony. What do you think about how Arkansas did in that game? And are there any lessons you think they can take from winning a road game like that into playing another one this weekend?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, like you mentioned, they avoided the trap game, right? I mean, that Ole Miss team is, I think we mentioned it pregame going into you know when we were first about to leave for Oxford was, you know, it's an Ole Miss team that hasn't really met its own preseason expectations and doesn't look like it did last year, but you know, there's still quality players on that team. You look at, you know, Malik Dia, Eduardo Klafke, guys like that, you know, guys who can hurt you. But I think, you know, they took care of business, and I agree. I never really felt like it was a game that Arkansas was ever in any real danger of losing. You know, I say that as I'm, you know, sitting up there as a neutral reporter, and I'm not invested in the game from an emotional standpoint. I'm not a coach or a player, so I'm sure maybe it was different from their vantage point. But from mine, I never really felt like Arkansas was in any danger to lose that game. Maybe if that three goes, or you know they take the easy points and go for a layup instead, you know, maybe it is a little bit different. But you know, I think looking back at that game from the perspective of having, you know, everything from last season, you know, Arkansas a lot of times had big leads that dwindled away, and then Arkansas ended up trailing or losing those games in some cases. And obviously that didn't happen, you know, the other night against Ole Miss. So I think that was obviously something that is going to be key going down the stretch. I mean, your obvious teams are going to go on runs, and your teams are going to, you know, come back and win games. So to be able to, you know, sustain that and, you know, maintain a lead even when a team is, you know, playing as well as Ole Miss was during that stretch. I think Ole Miss hit I think it was 8 of 10 shots to get back into the game. So to sustain that, to win a game when a team is playing as well as it was at that point in time, I think that's big for sure.
Similar arena at Auburn. It can be a different crowd, I'm sure. That's kind of they've developed a reputation there for being one of the rowdiest, most intimidating arenas in the country. And you know that they're going to be kind of out for blood tomorrow. And I'm not talking about just the fans, the players, everybody. Anytime Calipari comes to town, number one, that's always going to that's going to draw a crowd. But then what happened to them earlier this week? And I think it was it Tuesday night when Texas A&M looked like Auburn had beaten Texas A&M on that 35-foot shot, and then the call gets overturned on the replay review. People are upset. This is I'm very interested to see how Auburn's going to bounce back on Saturday, because you could see it going one of two ways. You could see it, using that as motivation and Arkansas's ranking and coming out and really trying to say, hey, we are a better team than the record shows right now. But you could also see that, maybe going the other way too.
Yeah, for sure. And it was a weird weird ending, just kind of watching it unfold on TV. I know they have more angles, the officials that they get to look at. So, I'm sure there are things that we just didn't get to see from just the general public, I guess, vantage point that they do get to see. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, I memean, everybody obviously was really upset after that. And, Auburn's a team that's coming in that really kind of needs results, right? I mean, they've dropped 3 of 4. They're 0-2 in SEC play. And, those 2 games were 2 games they really could have, or even maybe should have won. It took Georgia to overtime when it looked like, I believe Georgia was up 4 points with 10 seconds to go or something like that. And, Auburn fought back and found a way to get that game to overtime, but just didn't get over the hump. And then obviously what happened against Texas A&M happened. So yeah, it's a team that's kind of desperate for a good result, and it's a team that has a lot of quality, right? I mean, that Auburn team, they've got a lot of good players on that team. Keyshawn Hall, Todd Pettiford. I'm a big fan of Elijah Freeman and everybody on that roster. It's just a matter of putting everything together, and that's part of, I guess, the danger of playing the schedule Auburn did. I think Auburn played, it's 4 of the top 11 teams rated by KenPom right now. And, a lot of those games weren't particularly close. They lost to Houston by 1, but then a lot of those other games were, 28, 29 points against, Michigan and Arizona and those teams in the world. So it's a big spot for Auburn, I think. I think it's a game that you don't want to say it's a must-win this early in the season. I think covering Arkansas, we saw that teams can bounce back like Arkansas did last year, but there's not as many big-time opportunities this season as there were last season. So it is a very big spot for Auburn, for sure.
Yeah, the 1-point loss to Houston was technically a neutral site game, but it was in Birmingham. And then since then, they lost by 30 to Michigan in Las Vegas, lost by 29 at Arizona, and lost by 28 to Purdue at a neutral site in Indianapolis, which is basically a Purdue home game. What do you make of this team? Because you look at their SEC results, like we said, they could have beaten Texas A&M the other night, but they didn't. You look at the rosters, and you would think that Auburn probably should beat Texas A&M, especially with that being on their home floor. The weekend before, they lost to Georgia, an overtime game where it felt like, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but it felt like Georgia probably should have won that game in regulation, and the right team won in overtime based on how the game you had played out for probably about 38 minutes.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. And this Auburn roster, I kind of feel like it's still figuring things out. I mean, that's a team that lost all of its starting 5 from last season. I mean, that's a team that last season was very old, very experienced. I believe, and I apologize if this isn't correct, but I want to say I saw a graphic at some point that said that Auburn's average age was older than some NBA starting 5s, which is kind of crazy to think about from last season. And then you come into this season, you've got, a lot of new faces. Todd Pettiford's kind of the face of the team entering the season, and he hasn't, while his numbers have been, all right, they haven't been what people, I think, were expecting for a guy who would have gotten drafted had he stayed in the draft. And then you have, a lot of good players on the team, and I think they're just kind of still trying to, I guess, figure it out. I mean, Keyshawn Hall has been excellent. I mentioned Elijah Freeman coming up from the Division II ranks at Lincoln Memorial, and you got a guy like Kevin Overton who, pretty much all he's done in his college career has been winning, at Texas Tech and Drake before. So there's a lot of quality on the roster, and I just kind of think they're still trying to figure it out. And, we've seen them play well at times, but in the wins against St. John's, wins against NC State, are good wins, but maybe not as quality as if they would have been had it just looking at where those teams were projected coming into the season. So it's a tough spot, and I like a lot of the roster, the players on the roster. I just kind of think they're still trying to, I guess, figure it all out, if that makes sense.
Feels like this team, they use a lot of the results from last year as fuel, as motivation for them. We saw against Texas Tech. We heard it against Tennessee, the rebounding. I said it the other day. I wouldn't even be surprised if maybe the losses to Ole Miss last year was used a little bit as a motivation for the returning players. And, it's about half of the players that are playing right now. Auburn. Arkansas nearly beat them last year when the Tigers were number one. Arkansas had a late lead, and then Auburn ended up getting off the hook at the end. You were there. What do you remember about that game? And how much, if let's say that, these losses last year are being used as motivational tools, which I don't know if they are or not, but let's say they are, like how far can that go for a team?
I mean, it can go far, right? I think we've already seen that. I mean, the Texas Tech win was obviously a big deal for, all of the returners on the roster, and even the new guys, particularly the freshmen, talking about how they wanted that game for those returning guys. So I think that's a big thing for a lot of the players, right? I mean, that Tennessee game, like we mentioned, they got just flat dominated last season, and they used that, and I guess kind of studied the rebounding and not just matched Tennessee's physicality, but bettered it, I thought, in that game. So I do think there's a lot there. Maybe for this game, I'm not sure what the motivational tactic would be, because, last year Zvonimir Visic was 0 of 10 from the field in that game, and obviously he's at Illinois now, and Chad Baker-Mazara is not on Auburn's lineup either, and obviously he's a guy who I guess was trying to think of the right way to put it. Doesn't seem like he's the most well-liked person with regard to Arkansas men's basketball, if I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But he's gone. He's at USC now. He's having a good season there, and so I'm not sure what motivation tactics there are, other than you've got another big SEC road game and what this will be a great environment. That's one of the best home floors in the SEC. I thoroughly enjoyed going to Neville Arena last year, and I know I try not to get too into environments and stuff, because that's not why I'm at games, but they're good. It's obviously noticeable, but yeah, from last year's perspective, I remember that being a game that you could maybe should have won. And at that point of the year, Arkansas was still kind of on the bubble, and
I think we're losing Anthony.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. But yeah, if they had won that game last year, I think that would have taken them firmly off the bubble. But since they lost, it was still kind of in question. So yeah, last year it was a fun game to go to, fun environment. I really like Auburn as a town, but yeah, a lot to look back on, I guess.
I'll tell everybody about Bentonville Glass here while we get Anthony. Hopefully we can get his phone signal working a little bit better. They've been serving their community since 1971. They're committed, professional, and versatile. If you're looking for a quality leader or looking for skilled craftsmanship, you can come by Bentonville Glass, 507 South Main in Bentonville, or bentonvilleglass.com. Auburn was one of the big stories in the offseason, the weird timing of Bruce Pearl taking or retiring as their basketball coach, handing it over to Stephen Pearl. I think all this went down in like September. It was certainly after football season began. The timing of it felt very odd in the moment. And I think you always worry, Anthony, when you're making a coaching change like that, and then you're doing it at such an odd time, and it being the dad and the son taking over for the dad, and there haven't been a whole lot of instances where that's really worked out. You open yourself up to a lot of skepticism, a lot of criticism, and especially if it doesn't work. How much do you think what's happening with Auburn this year, being 9-6, 0-2 in the SEC, certainly not living up to the preseason expectations? How much of that is the coaching search, or do you think there's something else going on there? Or not the coaching search, but the coaching change, or do you think there's something else going on there?
Yeah, I think it's certainly an aspect of all of that, right? It's like, I mean, you're asking Stephen Pearl, who's always kind of been, I think, the presumed coach in waiting for whenever, Bruce did end up retiring. And, it was weird timing. I'm not sure how much of that was planned or anything along those lines. And, if Bruce felt like his time was up, I'm not going to be the one to judge him for making a decision that, if he felt he wasn't the man to lead the roster, then if he felt he made the right decision, then, that's for him to decide. But, it's a tough spot to ask, a first year guy to come into. Obviously, things that were built up as, over Bruce Pearl's entire tenure, but especially after last year, being the number 1 overall seed and reaching the Final Four and, potentially winning a national title last year. And you step into that as your first year as a head coach with a pretty much entirely new roster. And you have, the schedule that they have with, just so many of the top teams in the country on there. So it's a tough place to walk into, a tough situation to walk into as your first time as a head coach. So I think there's certainly something in that. But yeah, I think there's something with, all of that and the roster being, new, like we mentioned. I still feel like they're kind of figuring some things out. And, and that's not to mention just the knowing that, while the SEC isn't what it was last year, it's still, among the best leagues in the country. So I certainly think that maybe there is some aspects of, the timing of the retirement, it being Stephen Pearl's first year in charge and all of that. I'm not sure exactly how much of maybe some of the struggles come down to that, but I do certainly think that it is some of that. And, they've looked good at different points, but yeah, I still feel like they're putting things together, like we mentioned earlier.
I haven't seen a betting line yet for this game. We're recording this a little more than 24 hours before the game is played, and a lot of times the betting lines, you don't see them until about that 24-hour window. You think Arkansas ought to be favored to win?
I feel as though it'll be I feel like Auburn is going to be a slight favorite just based on the Ken Palm line or projection, I guess I should say. I think the ESPN analytics has it as as Auburn being favored. And obviously there's a lot of things that go into that, the home court being one of them. But I guess just on paper, with how you look at how the respective seasons have gone, I think, just from, I think the neutral point of view, I think most people would think Arkansas would be the favorite. So, yeah, I can see it both ways. I guess it's the easy way to put that.
There's 3 games in the SEC tomorrow where a ranked team goes on the road to play an unranked team, and a couple of them you kind of have to do a double take to, like Tennessee goes to Florida. Florida's not ranked, but Florida got that big win over Georgia the other night. Arkansas goes to Auburn, and then Georgia goes to South Carolina. Not a great week for SEC basketball games. The other matchups, LSU's at Vanderbilt, Oklahoma at Texas A&M. Missouri, who's 2-0, they go to Ole Miss. Ole Miss looking for its first SEC win. Texas goes to Alabama, and Mississippi State is at Kentucky. What game jumps out to you, maybe other than Arkansas Auburn?
I think the Florida game is an interesting one. Mm-hmm. You said Florida, Tennessee, right?
Yeah, Tennessee's at Florida. It's going to be an early tip-off, noon local time there in Gainesville.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one because Florida got a really nice win against Georgia, which Georgia I'm still kind of wishy-washy on. Obviously, I think they're 13-2 now, and have one of the best offenses in the country, but the non-conference schedule wasn't very good, and I think coming into SEC play, Georgia's best win was Cincinnati on paper, if I'm not mistaken, which that Cincinnati team stinks. So, Georgia's kind of an interesting one to look at. I mean, a good team. I'm just not sure where I think exactly where exactly I think Georgia falls in the SEC pecking order. But that Florida Tennessee game, I think is going to be really interesting because obviously Florida got the win over Georgia and played really well in the second half. I'm not sure how much of that comes down to the Santos Surreal ejection. I'm sure some of it obviously does because he's a very good player, but Florida got the job done and looked good in the second half.
Mm-hmm.
But the first half, the backcourt did not score. I think they were 0 of 7 from the field combined. So again, all of the Florida question marks come in the backcourt, not the front court, because Tommy Hauck has been phenomenal. Got Ruben Chimielu and Alex Condon, Micah Henglock, and you have all that quality in the front court. You need the backcourt to start playing as well as or you think that is capable of, because we've seen Boogie Fland and Xavier Lee play well in the past, be that at different times for Florida, not at the same time I don't think yet, and at Arkansas and Princeton respectively. So Florida's in an interesting spot with that game, and then Tennessee, after losing to Arkansas, really put it on Texas, which Texas is not good this year, at least not yet. But we know that Tennessee team is good. Nate Ament didn't have a great game against Arkansas, but he's still a quality player, and you have a lot of quality players on that team. Jacoby Gillespie, JP Estrella, all those guys. So I think that's the one that jumps out the most to me as two teams with a lot at stake, especially on the Florida side of things. Florida really needs, I think, a quality win to go along with that Georgia win. So that's the one that I've got my eyes on, with the exception of obviously the Arkansas Auburn game.
Anthony, good stuff. Arkansas plays Auburn at 5 o'clock Saturday, 5 o'clock Central tip time for the Razorbacks and the Tigers. You can watch it again on ESPN. We're going to have plenty of coverage on our website, wholehogsports.com. Hope you come to our website this weekend, too, and read our baseball coverage. Baseball preseason practice begins Monday at Baum-Walker Stadium. We talked to Dave Van Horn about his team this morning. We'll have a lot of baseball coverage on our website this weekend, too. Hope to see you there. Have a great weekend, everybody.